panel discussion, the second panel discussion, role of MDT in early lung cancer. And the moderator for this session is Dr. Arvind Kumar. Dr. Arvind Kumar is presently the chairman, Institute of Chest Surgery, Chest Oncosurgery, Lung Transplant, and the chairman of Medanta Robotic Institute. Dr. Arvind Kumar is the first surgeon to start robotic chest surgery in India. At the All Indian Institute of Medical Science, New Delhi in June 2008, he was honored with the prestigious Dr. B.C. Roy Award for Eminent Medical Person from the Government of India. And the panelists for this panel discussions are from Surgical Oncology, Dr. K.S. Gopinath. Dr. K.S. Gopinath is a senior surgical oncologist and also the director of ACG Bangalore, and the Shubham Garg. Dr. Shubham Garg is a senior surgical oncologist practicing at Fortis Hospital, New Delhi. Dr. Robin Thamudarai is a senior consultant at Tata Medical Center, Kolkata. From Medical Oncology, Dr. Deepak Kopaka. He is a consultant medical oncologist at Care Hospital, Hyderabad. From Radiation Oncology, Dr. Kundan Singh Sufai. He is the distinguished radiation oncologist and the unit head at Rajiv Gandhi Cancer Institute, New Delhi. From Pulmonology, Dr. Hari Krishna Gonugutla is working as a consultant intervention pulmonologist at Yashoda Hospital. From Pathology, Dr. Lavanya Nambaru is currently working as a senior scientific officer at Indo-American Cancer Hospital and Research Institute. So I would like to ask Dr. Arvind Kumar to start with the session.
Good afternoon, friends. Madam, can you see my slide?
Yes, sir, we can see.
And am I clearly audible?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Friends, a very warm good afternoon to all of you. And first and foremost, my humble and sincere regards to Professor Advani, Professor Gopinath, Dr. Vikas Mahajan, Arjiopa Healthcare, and all others who are involved in organizing this lung cancer summit. Thank you very much. And it's been a very interesting session since morning. The first lecture by Dr. Bal was very informative. The panel discussion, so elegantly moderated by Shyam Agarwal, brought out many important points. The next lecture on role of osimertinib was really an eye-opener and is actually possibly a game changer as well. And now it's my task to discuss the role of MDT in early cancer with a very esteemed panel that Madam has already introduced, which consists of 3 senior surgical oncologists, 1 radiation oncologist, 1 medical oncologist, 1 pathologist, and 1 pulmonologist. And of course, I am a surgical oncologist, but I am also the moderator. So what I'll do, this is my very, very esteemed panel, and I'll try to finish the discussion in just about half an hour, the time allotted to me. So to begin with, I take up a case. This is a 67-year-old gentleman, a non-smoker who presented with mild cough. Chest X-ray showed a small lesion in the left upper lobe, and CT and then PET was done, which also shows a very intensely FDG avid lesion in the left upper lobe. My first question is so what I'll do, I have written the names also here. First, a few very basic kind of discussions. Dr. Gopinath, are you there, sir? Professor Gopinath? Hello? I think Professor Gopinath is not there. Is Shubham Garg there?
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Okay, okay. So Shubham, let me start with you. You are probably the youngest and most vibrant member of this esteemed panel. Who refers the patients suspected to have early lung cancer? Is it usually the primary care physician or a pulmonologist or others? So when you get a case of early lung cancer in your practice, usually they come to you from where?
So most of the times it is usually the pulmonologist who refers the patients. It also happens that sometimes the pulmonologist or the primary care physician sends it to the medical oncologist, presuming that all lung cancers would not be operable and they would require surgery. And the medical oncologist then refers them back to us, feeling that they are better managed surgically. So I feel although the pulmonologist, but our other oncology colleagues also send us a lot of patients.
Excellent, Shubham. The point I wanted to highlight was that many times these are suspected by primary care physicians, sent to pulmonologists, and oftentimes, this has been my experience also, many people have this notion that, okay, most of the lung cancers are not resectable, and they are usually referred first to the medical oncologist, and then the operable cases get referred to us from there. My next question is to Dr. Hari Krishnan. Is a new early lung cancer patient. So, hello?
Hello.
Yeah, is Dr. Hari Krishnan there? Well, Professor Gopinath, I'll come back to you with the next question. Actually, when I put the, I'll come back to you, sir.
No problem.
Ji, sir. Professor Dr. Hari Krishnan, is a new early lung cancer patient that you have diagnosed, would you send him to, or him or her, to a medical oncologist, surgical oncologist, or radiation oncologist? What is your practice typically? Dr. Hari Krishnan? Is Dr. Hari Krishnan there?
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
In place of Hari Krishna, Dr. Hari Krishna, Dr. Abhinav will be
Okay.
in place
Abhinav,
of him, Dr. Abhinav will be speaking.
Abhinav, can you hear me? Abhinav, can you come in, please?
Dr. Abhinav.
Any pulmonologist on the panel who's still logged in? I just wanted to hear from them that once they diagnose a case, what is their usual practice? To send it for an MDT or send it to one of the specialists? Any pulmonologist who's logged in? Okay, I think we'll skip this question and move to the next one. So this patient had a PET scan which showed a non-FDG avid sub-centimeter prevascular lymph node. It was reported as likely non-specific, and there was no scan evidence of abnormal hypermetabolism to suggest any distant metastasis. Of course, the biopsy was reported as adenocarcinoma. So what further information would you need to decide about whether this patient is fit for surgical treatment or not? Dr. Robin Thambudarai, would you like to take this question? At this stage, what further information would you like to decide whether this patient is fit for surgical treatment or not?
He'll require to have a complete metastatic workup and also fitness evaluation with a lung function test and echocardiogram, basic bloods, to see if he is a candidate who will be able to tolerate an operation.
Very well said, sir. So we would be looking for any comorbidities, and if yes, we would investigate to assess the status. So example, if the patient has a renal or a liver or any other problem, we would like to assess what is the status of those comorbidities. As you very rightly said, we would like to do pulmonary function test and cardiac status. So could you please elaborate a little more, just in brief, about what would be your PFT criteria for accepting these patients for surgery? Very brief. I'm not going into detail because
so as a rule of thumb, we would like the predicted post-operative FEV1 and DLCO to be over 40%. Just as a rule of thumb across for any kind of lung dissection. Okay. And we would also like them to have an echocardiogram that's within normal limits without any significant pulmonary artery hypertension.
Okay, thank you very much. Very well said, sir. So we need these PFT, and of course, if there are abnormalities, then we go for a detailed evaluation, which we can't really go into there. Now, what about invasive mediastinal staging? Who would we need in this kind of disease also? This question was actually for Shubham, but maybe since Shubham has taken a question, I can put it to Professor Gopinath. Sir, what would be your approach to invasive mediastinal staging given the PET findings in this patient?
See, before the era of PET, we used to do the mediastinal staging. After the PET has come into picture, our use of mediastinoscopy for staging has come down, except in few centers, people still continue to do the mediastinal staging. Because with the availability of the EBUS and biopsy procedure, we prefer to do that than use PET-CT as one of the modalities. And regularly nowadays, we don't do mediastinal staging through the mediastinoscopy.
Very well said, sir. So as is shown in this diagram, so there are some conditions where actually you can skip any further mediastinal staging, and this would be if there is clinical N0 and a peripheral tumor in the outer third of the lung, which is less than 3 centimeters. You can probably skip any kind of mediastinal staging and go straight for surgery. But all other tumors where mediastinal lymph nodes are suspected to be positive, whether they are by size criteria of more than 1 centimeter or irrespective of size, if they are FDG avid on the PET scan, then this patient needs a complete mediastinal evaluation, which in earlier times used to be mediastinoscopy, but as was stated by Abhinav in the previous session, it's a combination of EBUS and EUS, which is termed as medical mediastinoscopy today, that most of these patients can be staged. Of course, there is a role for a high positivity suspect group, which is negative on EBUS and EUS, to have an intraoperative mediastinoscopy and confirmation by frozen section if that is available. Next question is
excuse me, sir. Excuse me, sir. Pulmonologist Dr. Abhinav is in now. You can ask the question.
Fine.
Okay.
At what stage of patient journey MDT is involved? Which means, so this is a question I would like to quickly run through all the panelists because it's a very important question. There is a tendency, as was stated, that the diagnosing primary care physician or pulmonologist may send them to surgical oncologist or to medical oncologist or to radiation oncologist, and they may decide the treatment based on their own. Numerous times we've seen resectability or unresectability decided by medical oncologists or radiation oncologists. So my question is, even in these cases for decision making, should every patient, even for early lung cancer, be actually passing through an MDT? Maybe I'll start with very quick one-liner answers. Professor Gopinath, sir.
Yes, it depends upon the institute. Hello. It depends on the institution you work, how you have developed your patient's protocol. If you do not have an MDT and you are having only the surgery as a department and trying to do that, then surgical oncologist in consultation. If there is an MDT consisting of surgeons, radiation oncologist and medical oncologist, they will pass through that, make a decision. Then there won't be any bias done. Surgery as the only modality, or first you give a neoadjuvant chemo and other thing. So the best is you develop the team of your own of MDT in your institution, make a decision. That becomes much more easy than the superiority of each of the consultants.
So sir, I'll summarize. What you are trying to say is that ideally every institution which is dealing with cancer patients on a regular basis should have an MDT, 1. And 2, you would agree, you would state that every lung cancer patient, where even these early cases, must be discussed and decided in MDT. Am I right, sir?
Hello.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Dr. Robin, just a quick comment. I mean, so this is a statement which Professor Gopinath has added. I will just run through all the panelists. If you disagree, you state your disagreement. Otherwise, you just say, I agree. Dr. Robin?
Yeah, I agree. At Tata Medical Center, all patients go through the MDT.
Very good. Shubham?
So I just want to add that obviously MDT is necessary, but it is the time of MDT. If you come to know on a PET CT that it is metastatic already, then you should not delay the MDT and get the medical oncologist involved straight away. Many times what happens that the surgeon only sends it for biopsy and the IHC and everything, but you should just give away that patient to the medical oncologist. And the same is stands for the medical oncologist, that if they feel now that's operable, they should be sent to earlier.
So my statement was that ideally every institution should have an MDT, and ideally even all early lung cancer cases should go through MDT. So would you say yes?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, Dr. Kundan,
Yes, sir, I totally agree, sir.
Dr. Deepak,
Yeah, I totally agree, sir.
Dr. Lavanya. Probably she's not there. Dr. Hari Kishan, are you there, sir? Abhinav?
I certainly agree, sir.
Okay, so the entire panel agrees that now a time has come where if your institution is dealing with these cases, and I have recently seen in many institutions that even if you don't have all the three facilities available in-house in your department, today there is always a scope for having a Zoom or some kind of a meeting where you can actually discuss the case without wasting any time. So there is, the panel feels that every case must pass through the through the MDT. So EBUS shows no enlarged mediastinal nodes in this patient. Patient is medically fit. So my next question is, do all patients with early lung cancer, that is stage 1 to 3A, undergo surgery? Or if not, what percentage don't undergo resection? Maybe Professor Gopinath can take this question.
Arvind, you said stage 1 to stage 3A.
Yeah.
Okay, definitely stage 1, I will subject them to surgery. If the patient is fit for surgery, there is no choice about it. Stage 3, there is a conflict of interest between neoadjuvant CT-RT followed by surgery as one of the modalities of treatment in stage 3A. Okay, this is how one can look at it. Surgery still remain the gold standard between stage 1 to stage 3. Stage 3A and B, you have to make a decision whether to do surgery first, followed by adjuvant CT-RT, or CT-RT followed by NA-CT-RT plus followed by surgery.
So your clear-cut message, sir, is that if it's stage 1 and 2, if the patient is resectable, if the patient is medically fit, all cases should be subjected to surgery. When it comes to 3A, you would go for neoadjuvant chemotherapy and re-evaluation, and at which stage it could be surgery, or it could even be continuing concurrent chemoradiation. Have I stated you rightly, sir?
Yeah. Yes.
So my next question is for Dr. Kundan. Would you like to offer SBRT to this patient even if he was medically fit for surgery?
So as per now, the standard of care is definitely for stage 1. There is no doubt that surgery is there. But if you look at the results, definitely SBRT has shown, though the trials were like they were prematurely, they were not fulfilled. So we should give an option of SBRT to these patients. Where this is an option, but the standard of care is surgery. So accordingly, and telling them what are the pitfalls of both the modalities and what are the toxicities involved in that. But in patients who are medically unfit, then definitely SBRT is a treatment of choice for stage 1, early stage patients. And if we go to stage 3A, typically a subset of patients which have the invasive component in T3, or like N2 patients with a bulky N2 disease or a multi-station N2 disease. Then again, if we look at the NCCN guideline, the category 1 evidence is for definitive CCRT followed by immunotherapy.
Very well stated, sir. So this was actually a topic of discussion in another similar meeting yesterday where there was a debate, and it's a regular topic for discussion and debate. But as you very rightly stated, as per the evidence available today for the medically operable patients, it's the surgery, which is the standard of care for 1 and 2. This statement is as of today. We don't know. A couple of months later, this statement may need to be changed. But as you said, for stage 3A, of course, there are different views. So my next question is there anyone who's unfit for SBRT also? And just as we say that this patient is medically unfit for surgery, are there subset of patients who are unfit for SBRT also?
Yes, I will answer this.
Dr. Gopinath, this question is for Dr. Kundan, sir. He's a radiation oncologist.
Okay.
Dr. Kundan?
Yes, sir. So actually, there are a subset of patients where there is a very ultra-central disease, and those patients where we are not able to give a doses which are biologically equivalent dose of more than 100. So 100 radiobiologically equivalent dose. So those are the patients where actually the benefit of SBRT will not be there. And if the lung condition is very bad, like we have a severe comorbidities, in those situations also we have to be very careful when we are actually going for SBRT. But the point is, we have treated patients within 80 years of age with a lung function up to of FEV1 of 60%, less than 60%, and DLCO2 of less than 40% also, and they have tolerated it well. So in majority of the cases, we can do it, but yeah, we have to be very careful when the disease is ultra-central, when it is touching the major vessels and airways.
Very well stated, Dr. Kundan. So what you have stated is that there will be a subset of patients who are medically unfit for surgery, and they would be fit for SBRT. However, if we take this entire spectrum of those who are medically unfit for surgery and coming for SBRT, those who are very, very bad lung condition and those who have a very centrally placed tumor, there could be issues in SBRT as well.
Yes, so the only difference is in ultra-central disease, you have to do a risk adaptive approach, which are like peripheral tumors, which are not touching the rib cage. You can go ahead with a single fraction of radiation or a 3 fractions. But if it is an ultra-central touching major airways, then probably you have to fractionate it more. You have to give it in 8 fractions or 12 fractions, then it is safe.
Thank you, Dr. Okay, so this patient underwent surgery, and this is his pathology report. It was an invasive adenocarcinoma, moderately differentiated, bronchial, all margins were free. And when we looked at the lymph nodes, there were 2 lymph nodes at station 10 and 11. So this was basically a T2N1 disease. Where does the follow-up happen post-surgery? Professor Gopinath, once you've operated these patients, would you keep them with you and you take the decision, or would you send these patients after surgery to your other colleagues? And by stage, what percentage patients are referred to medical oncologist post-surgery, all or selective? And I put this question to all the panelists very quickly. So, sir,
See,
short answer.
we have an MDT. All
Yes.
these patients will go through that. Basically, when the patient basically belongs to the department and who perform the surgery, he will be following it up. In all metastatic diseases, the follow-up will be done by the medical oncologist.
Okay. Anyone differs with this approach? Okay. So this patient will be immediately rediscussed back in the MDT, and obviously, as you said, if it's a metastatic disease, then they'll be followed there. So now we come to adjuvant chemotherapy. So benefit of adjuvant chemotherapy, we've already discussed drug regimens. We have discussed about the role of platinum-based chemotherapy. This was discussed in the previous discussion also, that there is a benefit. I would like to hear from Dr. Deepak now, very briefly, about what would be your approach once this case comes back after surgery. Let's say it's a stage 1 or 2 disease, and patient comes to your to an MDT. What would be your take on adjuvant chemotherapy in these patients? Very briefly, sir. Dr.
Sir,
the medical oncologist at Care Hospital, Hyderabad.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for the opportunity, sir. So for previously for stage 2 onwards, we were planning for adjuvant chemotherapy of 4 cycles of vinorelbine and cisplatin. Now with the data of ADAURA coming in, we are getting EGFR analysis for any patient having stage more than stage 1B, or that lesions more than 3 centimeters, node negative. We are doing EGFR analysis, and we are adding osimertinib to these group of patients. If they have requirement for chemotherapy, we are sequencing EGFR inhibitors after chemotherapy. If there is no benefit of adjuvant chemotherapy for stage 1B patients, we are just giving osimertinib in this group of
No,
patients.
Dr. Deepak, let's just restrict. Osimertinib is my next slide. Let's just
Okay,
restrict
sorry.
to chemo. So which patients are you accepting for chemo?
Node positive patients and patients with high risk disease, like patients having polydifferentiated histology more than 4 centimeters, parietal pleural involvement, lymphovascular invasion. That is stage 1B patients having high risk. We are giving adjuvant chemotherapy.
Size criteria?
More than 4 centimeters, sir.
Okay. So these patients are all accepted for chemotherapy. Of course,
Yeah.
osimertinib is I'm coming to that next.
Yeah.
The next question is for Dr. Kundan. Role of post-operative radiotherapy in early stage resected lung cancer. So would you consider, this is 1 and 2. Dr. Kundan, is
Yes,
there any role for post-op radiotherapy in stage 1 and 2 resected lung cancer?
So unfortunately, no. The trials have shown, in fact, the worst results when we give port to these patients. So for
So why
early
did you
stage,
say unfortunately?
and in fact, sir, for stage,
I would say fortunately, no.
yeah, fortunately, no. For the patient, it's fortunately.
Yes.
And everything is for the patients.
Okay. So
that's
I'm coming to the next question. Yeah. So you said 1 and 2, no role. Now, would you consider post-op radiotherapy for all stage 3 and 2 disease, irrespective of the surgical margins? That's the next question for you, Dr. Kundan.
This was again till the recent trial lung ART results have come up, though it's in the abstract form. So prior to that, I was always very skeptical when advocating radiation for incidentally diagnosed N2 disease in these patients for surgery, because the post-op morbidity is post-RT morbidity is quite high in these patients. And now the trial lung ART trial is again is a negative trial. It has not shown any statistically significant difference. So I feel we have to be very judicious when we are advocating post-operative radiotherapy to these subgroup of patients. It has now gone out of vogue actually post-operative.
Okay, fine. So this was the point I wanted. Next step, as was raised by Dr. Deepak, molecular test in early lung cancer. Would you do only EGFR or EGFR and ALK or NGS? This question is for Dr. Lavanya. If you were to decide what molecular test we should order, what would be your recommendation in a patient who's being operated for early lung cancer?
Sir, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for giving this opportunity. Am I audible now, sir?
You are very well audible. Please go
Sir,
ahead.
there are 2 criteria. First is the amount of the tissue we are receiving, and the tumor percentage present in the pre-analytical fixed. Then, if the patient is affordable with a tumor percentage higher than 10%, it is always advisable to go to the NGS panel. Otherwise, the tumor percentage is less than 10%, and you have a very less tissue. You will go for the real-time PCR and ALK and the ROC and the PDL1 by IHC. EGFR by real-time PCR.
Okay, my next question is to Dr. Deepak. Dr. Deepak, with the advent, you mentioned about the ADAURA trial in your comments. Dr. Lavanya, could you kindly just switch off, mute yourself? There's some disturbance coming from. Yeah, thank you. With the advent of availability of the ADAURA trial now, what are your thoughts on testing EGFR mutations in the early lung cancer? Should it be tested in every patient? Number 1. Number 2, should we test only EGFR or should we be ordering the entire panel in all the patients? Dr.
So my practice traditionally for the adjuvant setting, I'm just doing EGFR. some of the mutations like AL, KRAS are founder mutations which eventually persist as the tumor evolves. But in adjuvant setting, I'm just getting an EGFR analysis and starting this patient on treatment. As per the inclusion criteria, from 1B onwards, tumors which are more than 3 centimeters onwards, we see a strong benefit of adding osimertinib in patients.
Dr. Lavanya, could you kindly unmute yourself? If you had an option of doing this testing on the initial CT guided biopsy or a bronchoscopic biopsy sample versus the post-surgical resection sample, would you have any preference for either of the two?
Sir, definitely the surgical sample will be more and we'll have a lot of tumor tissue in that. So that will be good for the NGS panels. And if you want to go for a single testing for EGFR, then biopsy sample or resected sample will be also good, sir. And the other suggestion is,
Dr. Lavanya, what are the basic requirements for a successful biomarker testing? Any tips or any message or any advice you want to give to the clinicians?
The tissue which is been resected or the biopsy which has been taken, or the whatever the tissue has been taken should be properly fixed. The pre-analytical should be properly done. And after that, the testing should be done as early as possible so that the results will be good and the fragmentation of the DNA or the other DNA issues will not be there. If we do the testing earlier, the results will be better, sir. Or the other way is, you can also preserve the DNA, extract the DNA and preserve it for more than 5 years. And then you can see for the panel of testing what you can do depending on the amount of the DNA you have, sir. That is also the other way.
Thank you, Dr. Lavanya. Dr. Deepak, my next question, you said you would send for EGFR. Is there a situation where you would order other tests also in these early lung cancer cases?
Unfortunately, I'm not doing that in the practice yet, sir. For early stage post-resection patients who are yet to receive adjuvant chemotherapy, we're just getting EGFR done. Probably after the innovation data comes out, we might get ALK and PDL1 done. But currently in our practice, we're just limiting it to EGFR alone. And now if it is patients who are going for chemoradiation, probably we get even EGFR and ALK and PDL1. Because there is subset data saying that EGFR and ALK don't benefit with adjuvant durvalumab as much as patients who are having negative for these mutations. And the PDL1 levels have shown that patients who have PDL1 more than 1%, not 0, definitely benefit more with durvalumab rather than patients having PDL1 0 with durvalumab.
Thank you. So this is the message regarding the fixing, which Dr. Lavanya has already said. Now, this is the trial about which we've had a complete lecture. Osimertinib as adjuvant therapy in patients with stage 1B to 3A EGFR mutation positive lung cancer after complete tumor resection. Since we've had a complete lecture discussing every aspect of this, my question to Dr. Deepak is ADAURA result a practice changing situation? And do you see that the management or post-surgical management of these patients will undergo a complete change now with this trial results being available?
Yeah, so this is a huge discussion which we have in our medical oncology forums regularly. I'll not waste much of the time, but the crux of the trial per se is the hazard ratio benefit. The risk reduction is huge, the ones which we've never seen in lung cancer in the early stage. But DFS, as we've seen, is not an ideal endpoint for the study, which was a primary endpoint for the study, is not the adequate marker to see this will in the future eventually turn up as an overall survival advantage. But yet we cannot deprive our patients with the huge benefit which we've seen in this study. We are doing that in our practice. We are assessing for EGFR and we are putting our patients on osimertinib if they are EGFR positive and they're affordable.
So let me run this question through all the panelists because many times these patients who've been operated would continue to be having follow-up with us, the surgical oncologists. So Professor Gopinath, would this ADAURA result change your practice now? And would all your operated patients have EGFR and osimertinib as an adjuvant therapy? Professor Gopinath? Professor Gopinath? Dr. Robin? Dr. Robin?
I think the microphone is muted, so people are not able to speak.
Whose microphone?
Person who's speaking's microphone is on. The others are automatically in mute state.
Yeah, but they can unmute themselves, no? Dr. Gopinath, are you there, sir? Dr. Shobham Garg?
Yes, sir. Hi. So I am for anything which increases the survival of lung patients, especially it helps us a lot because it looks very bad when we operate, we do a major surgery.
No, Shubham, give a clear-cut answer.
Yes.
We have heard a detailed talk about ADAURA trial. Now, with this result being published,
Yes.
would your practice of these patients change now?
Yes, it would, sir.
Okay. Dr. Kundan?
Sure, sir. I think this is quite a convincing data. So I think we should.
Abhinav?
I would certainly agree, sir. This is
Okay.
this
So-
is something which we do need.
Yeah.
Sorry,
So
this
there
is
is a,
talking- sorry, I was having some network issue, but yes, certainly I would also agree.
thank you, sir. Thank you. Is Professor Gopinath now there?
Yeah,
Sir, with ADAURA results available, if you operated and the patient still by chance is following it up with you only, would you today with this trial routinely order EGFR testing, and if it's positive, put your patients on osimertinib or send to your medical oncologist for the same as a routine?
see, we will do the EGFR in all the cases and we'll refer to medical oncologists. We don't give these things
That's
because
fine.
we had a strict vertical treatment modalities available to us.
So my question was about the practice. So you would agree that with this trial now, there is a significant shift in our practice. So all of us would be ordering EGFR in all our early resected lung cancers as well. And in those
Yeah.
who are positive, we would recommend to them osimertinib, for which the patients could be sent to our medical oncology colleagues. Thank you very much. And my last question is, with a lot of research going on in early lung cancer, what more can be done to improvise MDT collaboration? And I'll start with Professor Gopinath. This is the last question and we wind up after this. Professor Gopinath.
Yeah, I think there is a need for MDT in all the institutions.
Very
And
well
there
said,
is-
sir.
There is a need for involving the molecular diagnostic people in our MDTs. So they will realize the problems of the patients, the cost involved in it. It is not only an evidence base, we have to look at it, experience and economy, the logistics, various things we have to consider in MDTs apart from science as an entity. So definitely there is a need to have an MDT along with radiation oncologists, medical oncologists, and surgical oncologists, imaging pathologists, molecular biologists is the need of the hour. In
Very well
future
said.
years, we
Very
should
well
be
said,
able
sir.
to get better.
Dr. Robin, quick comments.
I agree with what Dr. Gopinath said. It is our standard practice, Tata Medical Center. Our MDT consists of the medical oncologist, pulmonologist, the pathologist, the radiation, and the surgeon. And certainly everyone has.
He also mentioned about involving the molecular biologist, and I would add a physiotherapist also to that.
Yes, so that absolutely true.
Dr. Shubham?
Sir, I feel MDT happens in a very informal way. I pick up my phone, speak to my medical oncologist. We need to do it more professionally and document it so that we actually collate those results so that MDT actually happens. So yes, that is the need of the hour.
Dr. Kundan?
So I agree. Actually, we have to involve all the people who are involved in the care. So all of those people should be there in the MDT. And at the same time, we should have documentation. We are doing in our hospital also. So kind of a documentation and seeing whether this MDT is having any impact on the care and the results which we get from doing an MDT of these patients. So we have to continually evolve along with this MDT, and then
True.
accordingly, if we can collect the data, then only we will know that whether this MDT is helping or not.
Dr. Deepak?
Yeah, on a medical oncologist and molecular biologist in the MDT is a new ad, and I think that's going to have a huge impact in our practice.
Dr.
I agree
Lavanya?
with you.
Yes, sir. It is very much important. And then who are doing the testing, they know about the sample better and help to preserve the sample more.
Abhinav?
Certainly, sir, MDT has a very good role, and we should also think of advancing towards bronchoscopic treatments in the MDT. So maybe a rapid MDT in cases where there are single lesions or maybe a solitary nodule, which can be treated in the same sitting using localized radiotherapy. That sort of a MDT which can happen on spot should
So,
also be incorporated and thought of, because
so
that will be the need of the hour, and that will be the future.
yeah, so there is a consensus among all panelists that whether it's early lung cancer or it's late lung cancer, every patient ideally should be going through a lung cancer MDT, and it's high time that all those centers where individuals may be treating these cases in isolation should actually get together with their colleagues, and either in a physical form or by chance, if not possible in a true physical form, in some digital form, every case ideally should be discussed. And this should ideally involve, as was very elegantly stated by Professor Gopinath, a surgical oncologist, a medical oncologist, a radiation oncologist, a molecular marker, molecular biologist, a radiologist. Ideally, I would include a pathologist also, and a physiotherapist, all these people, and of course a pulmonologist. So all these people should be discussing. There's so much happening in these cases in the fields all the time. There are often developments in field other than ours, and when we have the benefit of all these specialists pooling in their resources, their data, their experience, and their knowledge together, I'm sure the patients will get a much better care than they would get if any of the individual person was to take a decision which involves not just his field, but some of the decisions where he may actually encroach and sometimes subconsciously so on the fields of other people, and in the process may take a decision which is not in the best clinical practice area. So therefore, I would like to thank all the panelists from the bottom of my heart for a very wholehearted participation and giving a very clear, crisp message on all the topics. And I would like to close with the hope that with this message going out loud and clear, from today onwards, every lung cancer patient in the country would only be managed in the setting of MDT and not in isolation. All the panelists, thank you so much for your participation, and over and back to the organizers. Thank you very much.